McDonald's and they tried to take my cane to charge me. I think they thought it was a fishing pole. So I'm like, I have to always clarify that now. Does this seem loud to you? Yes. Yeah, it seems really loud. Can we turn it down, Derek? Okay. How, that down a little more. I'm hearing myself and I feel weird about it. Otherwise, I can take it off and yell. I think it's better. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. Okay. We have 30 minutes to cover some stuff, right? Now, some of the stuff, I teach up at the business school at the U, and this is stuff, I'll teach for a whole semester. My background is I've worked for 3 governors. I worked for the Bush administration, ran some nonprofits. My most recent job was with Governor Herbert at the state of Utah. I was his budget director, ran the budget about $22 billion, and then was over all the operations for the state, from prisons to permitting, et cetera. And I'll tell you this, government is a beast that needs to be tamed. Yes? Now, my other story in this, because I want to give you guys some focusing mechanisms. You heard a lot of awesome content today, and I want to give you a few ways to focus. But my story is being blind. There was a time as I was transitioning from sighted to blind, which was kind of my 20s. I was literally on SSDI, Social Security Disability Income. The idea of working seemed impossible to me. That did not seem like an option. I was just living off $333 a month trying to figure out my life. And I was on the other, and I'm grateful for a safety net, and anyone who complains about America, I just don't have the empathy for, because we have so many beautiful blessings in this country. I had a great safety net. But I didn't want to stay in the safety net, right? It started to feel like a trap, not a net. And I lived the other side of the bureaucracy, which is a nightmare. And luckily, I had some amazing mentors who got me out, and then I started my path and somehow ended up doing what I was doing in my life. So I have some very strong opinions, and you can take them or leave them. My children normally leave them, but you can take them or leave them about this. And one of those is that there are so many problems in government. I'm going to talk about, now, let me caveat this. I'm doing a slide presentation. I can't see the slides. So if I am speaking to a slide that doesn't exist, just roll with me on it, all right? Just roll with me on it, all right? Right, we can't all take ourselves too seriously in this world. So I'm going to give you guys, this should say 4 big ideas, yes? 4 ideas. 2 of them are kind of combined, systems thinking and focus. I'll give you an example of that, and then dosage. I'm going to set those up because they're foundational ideas as I talk to you about the next 2 issues, about how do you focus with all of the things you were given today. How do you start to think about focusing? And then I'll end it up with this idea of hidden capacity and how we can start thinking about taming the beasts of government. Now, a byproduct about my work in Utah, few of the concepts I'm talking about today, we did it across all of state government. We literally bent the cost curve. We had fewer state employees when I left in the year 2020 than we did in 2000, with a 30% in growth in population. Just in labor costs alone, we saved $500 million a year. And that doesn't include a lot of other savings, let alone the quality we had. So I believe there's hidden capacity of our own government, and it matters when we talk about building communities, because government will often say it's a money problem. Yes, I need more money. I fundamentally disagree with that. There is so much untapped potential within government to repurpose into the things that are important. But we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So. The first idea, we're going to talk about systems and focus. Let's go really quick. Does that say A, B, C, D, E? Yes. Does that one? Did I miss it? Oh, is that it? Yes. Okay. Now, Christy knows this. This is just a simple concept that I want you to understand about focus. Now, my belief in government is that most problems are not worth solving. You're going to be hit by like a million things. The reality is you have finite time and attention. As advocates, as citizens, as people who run programs, you have finite time and attention, and you cannot chase every problem, yes? True. So if that's true, how do we focus? Now, we could spend a 2-day class just on that, and that's what I teach at the university, but let me give you just the concept. This is representation of a very simple system. The principle here is true no matter what program you work in. I don't care if it's housing affordability, education, healthcare, prison systems, business permitting. The concept is true, all right? Here's the system. I've got 5 different people doing 5 different jobs, A, B, C, D, E. A can do 20 units an hour, B can do 16 an hour, C can do 10 an hour, D can do 24 an hour, and E can do 18 an hour, yes? All right, I got that right. If I get my slides right, I get a Snickers bar. That's my treat to myself. And I'm going to put 100 units of work in front of this system. At the end of the hour, how much can this system produce? It's tricky.
No, because they start over.
It's tricky. It's a very tricky question. And let me tell you, I asked this question in front of to senior directors, cabinet members. All right? I'm working right now in 7 different states. I'll ask this question to cabinet members, people running government, and we don't know the answer. Now, and we'll often count each one and average it, et cetera. But let me walk you through this. And I just want to emphasize the idea of focus and systems thinking. A can do 20 units. A passes 20 units to B. But B can only do 16. I have 4 things waiting now. That's a person. That's somebody who's homeless, right? This is, in business terms, we call this inventory, which is never a good thing, okay? It's a liability. But these create call centers, people waiting for services, a kid stuck in a child welfare system, not getting the services when they need it. This goes to B. B can do 16. B hands 16 to C. C can do how many? 10. Now I have 6 more units waiting in my system. C passes to D. D can do 24, but how many does D have to work on? 10. So how many can the system produce? 10. Okay, this is important to understand for 2 reasons. One, what if I go and do all my improvements on A? Does my system improve? No. Could it be worse? Yeah. Absolutely. I see this in homelessness. I'm working in homelessness right now. We do a lot of work up front to intake, to assess. And we over-assess, and where the constraint is in the system, we call this constraints management, we're just overloading the system, okay? So every system has a constraint. Sometimes it's a policy constraint. Sometimes it's a flow constraint. Sometimes it's a measurement. A lot of times, tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I behave. Very often we see messed up, perverse incentives in our systems because of how we measure them. You know, don't even get me started with higher ed, even though I work there part-time, all right? Only part-time. So I can't tell you to take full credit. So this is one concept I want you to understand, is that not all problems are worth solving, and nothing happens in a vacuum. And the biggest challenge in government is the thing that is right in front of us is the problem that feels most urgent, and we want to react to it. Stepping up a bit and looking at the bigger picture. Now, I'll show you a few things with community and quality thriving communities, what I mean by this. But it's important to know, as advocates, as citizens, focus matters. Focus matters. There's always a leverage point. I'm not going to teach you today how to find all the leverage points. I'll give you a few hints. But not all problems matter. Now, the next concept I want to teach you is really important. What does this say? Okay. When you go to take medication, do you just take medication whenever you want, forever, how long you want? 3 days, right? Something. Tell you, because there's an intensity that's needed for the medication to have effect. All right? Too often in our initiatives with government, if it's policy or operations, does this keep going in and out? Yeah. All right, I'm just yelling at you guys. Derek, can I just take this off?
Keep going, just because I'm streaming you as well.
Oh, okay. All right, it's kind of going in and out. Is that dosage matters. So let me show you. I'm going to skip that slide and go to, does this have a picture of a fast-running river? Yes. Okay. When you think about hydropower plants, power plants that are fueled by water, this is an important concept because it's true in the work you'll be doing. A very fast running stream, if it's small, is not enough to generate power, even if it's running really fast, okay? But on the other hand, you could have a very, very large river, lots of volume, but it's slow. Still not going to be sufficient to create power. Power is created, is this a dam with the thing at the bottom? Power is created, this is why they do dams and the water comes down. Lots of water going quickly. Why do I share this with you? Because when you're focused and you have enough speed and force behind you, which is dosage, you can make impact. Power is the combination of speed and volume. That's why focus is so important. It's very easy to spread, this is in your personal lives as well, to spread your time and attention on too many initiatives. And when you are spread thin, operationally and in policy, your impact is marginalized. And it's tempting in this space when we get into this next phase of communities and quality communities, you can't focus on everything. You just, because you'll have insufficient dosage and you'll make marginal steps everywhere, but that big system, getting actually something completed, won't occur. Fair enough? Okay, I want you to understand this as we get into the next phase of all of this. Okay, what's next?
Power lines.
Oh, this is power being created. You guys just do the presentation. I'm going to leave, and you guys can just walk through this. All right, what do I have here?
Signs your
Oh, yeah, these are signs of dosage. Just basically everything will take longer, nothing will happen. And again, when we're talking government, this is rampant. We think about the sooner we start something, the sooner it will be completed. Not true. We think that how many things we're doing is great. Not true. What counts is, are you completing things? Are you getting impact? Governors who launch strategic initiatives that are 54 pages long, throw them in the trash. Because they will not have enough sufficient impact or volume or dosage or focus to actually bend the cost curve. How many people in the United States have been talking about healthcare costs in this country? Right? It's because they're not focused on the leverage point, and they're chasing too many things, and there's not sufficient focus to make impact. And this is so true in the work that you're all doing. So let's talk about how this relates to quality communities. This is vicious cycles. Next one. Does this have a cycle? Yeah. All right. Now, when you're talking about quality communities, and somebody, I want to be so on time for the next presenter, so somebody give me a 5-minute check when it's time. Because I'm going fast to give you guys. Communities are never homeostasis. There's never just like not any change in a community. It's either in growth mode or it's in declining mode. That's just how it is. Now you could be in an acute phase of growth and an acute phase of decline, but you're always moving into one space or the other. You know, I did all the revenue estimates and the economics was all on my shop, and we could see this in communities all across the state and the country. They are either moving in one positive growth direction or declining. Now, I want to give you 2 ways to know this because it will help you focus your own efforts. When you see communities in decline, this is a very common vicious cycle. Now, vicious cycles are when we take a lot of challenges and we show the logic of cause and effect, and this is systems thinking. Nothing happens in a vacuum, nothing. Everything is impacting everything else. And what we want to learn as good policy people and good operations people is to start understanding the ecosystem. How does housing affordability affect economics? And how does the job market affect homelessness? They're all related, okay? So I'm not going into each one, but at a generic level, what we'll see in communities in decline, you can see it, right? There's a triggering event, either a plant leaves or crime goes up, which we've heard some great presenters on that today, right? So we've seen this in San Francisco and Seattle. Crime goes up, homelessness, which is not criminal, but I'm just saying there's lots of things that could go on that start creating the cycle. So a triggering event happens, citizens, businesses leave, there's less revenue. When there's less revenue, it's more difficult to make investments into the community. When that happens, we've got communities just not as attractive, so more people leave. So you have less money to make investments, and the cycle goes on and on. Getting out of these vicious cycles, and this is why you'll have places like Baltimore City, where I used to work in DC for many years and lived near Baltimore City. People, mayors, everyone have been talking bureaucratic blah, blah, blah for years, and nothing changes in any significant way. And for me, if you're not 25% improvement, it's not an improvement. It's not an improvement, it's noise. This cycle goes because they're in a self-perpetuating cycle. And so when you want, and I love what Policy Circle does about talking about solutions. Just one thing I so admire about their philosophy. So people can keep talking about the problem. The question is, how do you break this cycle? Right? How do you get out of this? And it's not chasing a million ideas or having 4,000 strategic plans out there, which government loves to do. Strategy plan all over the place. Here's how we want to get out of this, and I'll show you growth cycles. Communities that are on the decline, we have to have what we call a complete solution. So let me give you an example. When there was a certain general, when we were in the Iraq war, that was going into an area that was completely controlled by the enemy and the terrorist groups. And there is no way you can go over there and take over a whole city at once. So they would go in to the center and fully take over one building top to bottom and have complete control over that. That gave them a home base so they could go out and take over 2 or 3 more buildings from there. And that would expand their circle of influence or their stronghold. And then they would go further. They had a complete solution in one area before they expanded. When we're in communities in decline, you can spread your resources everywhere, or you can get incredibly focused with sufficient dosage to make an impact in one area and you can expand. So, for example, let's say you have crime problems, which is very common in cities in decline, right? Because you start having blight, you start having areas that are unoccupied. When you don't have pedestrian traffic, crime goes up. We just know the cycle that happens. I may not be able to go to Baltimore City and secure crime across the whole city at once, is what they've tried to do and has never worked, and it drives me bonkers. Or I could go in and figure out, where's my leverage point? Where are my natural assets? What do I already have that I could really, what we call exploit in the world, I mean, it's an operational term, but really maximize, optimize. Okay, I have the Inner Harbor for tourism, I have Johns Hopkins. Can I go out from there a few blocks with a complete solution and dosage to, in fact, maybe by Johns Hopkins, get a really strong hold with a medical bio device? And just expand 2 blocks. Complete solution from real estate to housing to workforce development that can actually staff that, the distribution, logistics to move products out, whatever I need. Taxes, I'm always for reducing taxes. Government has capacity. How do I create competitive tax environment so medical bio devices will want to be there? Any policy or liability issues? A complete solution, what we call full kit, top to bottom. And I get a stronghold. Now I'm inching into the city a bit more, right? So you do one thing at a time, complete solution with dosage, and it gives you the leverage point to take on the next problem. So I introduce a complete solution. Some more residents stay, some businesses retain, and it can even come, which generates some more revenue so I can do what? The next complete solution, okay? This is how we get out of these vicious cycles. It's very focused interventions that are top to bottom complete. That takes discipline, it takes energy, otherwise we just are in what I call the illusion of progress. We're making a lot of changes, we're talking about a lot of stuff, but we're not seeing results. And the citizens we serve, from my perspective in government, deserve much, much more than that, yes? All right, so let's look about communities and growth. These are interesting, right? Because we all think growth's the best. Utah's in a high growth mode. I'm like, I don't want people moving in anymore. I love to hike the parks instead of getting too crowded. I wanted to be a forest ranger. Nobody would hire a blind forest ranger. Go figure, right? So anyway, I live by the mountains at least. So let's look at this cycle. You have, well, you can see it. And the states do this a lot. They put out, and I'm not saying this is true for every state, but this is many states. A lot of the leadership want to grow. So true for Texas, Austin's doing this a lot. A lot of incentives and tax breaks to get companies to move in. Is this something we see? Yes, right? We see this, right? Okay. They come in, but they're not paying the full cost. Usually the incentives go out, and they're not paying the full cost. For every growth in population, you have a portion that will have Medicaid, a portion that will have prison issues. You're going to have more infrastructure, schools, water, utilities. Seldom have I ever seen an economic package that pays for the full cost of moving in. So I have growth, I don't have the full cost of moving in, so I now have strained resources, strained capacity on my infrastructure, but I don't have sufficient money. So the quality of life that people came for now gets compromised. Yes? We see this, and it gets compromised. And so when that happens, it just creates this whole, there's more pressure then to fix all this stuff. Austin traffic is not great, so there's pressure to build out more roads and infrastructure. And there's not sufficient resources. So there's pressure on policymakers to do what? Either raise taxes or attract more people to come in. This is a very common growth cycle I see going on in states. For me, it's nonsense, but it's breakable. How do we change this cycle? This is a tough one for policymakers to do, but we finally turned the corner on this one in Utah after nagging for 8 years. Pay the full cost. Now, that's not popular, right? It's not popular. But if you're going to come into a state, there's impact fees for new development to help pay for infrastructure and utility costs and all that stuff. But if I actually pay the full cost of coming in, I start to break this cycle. I actually have sufficient revenue to pay and protect those natural assets of why people came in the first place. What happens in these growth cycles is once people come in and there's pressure on the infrastructure, it's too late, right? And now people are trying to play catch up. Traffic congestion, all this stuff. If you know going in you're going to have into growth cycle, get on top of this cycle. And if you have a better way to pay the full cost, you can protect your natural assets, build your infrastructure. And when that happens, you start protecting your quality of life as growth occurs, which means more people come without needing the incentives, without throwing the tax dollar pay away. We're playing with taxpayer dollars. It's a win. Who gets to win? I get to choose as a government. Who gets to win? I'll pay you some money here, you there, you win, you lose. I don't like tax incentives. If you just have solid, really low taxes with good policies that plan for growth versus incentivizing growth, you can get out of that growth cycle as well, right? So in these areas, you often you much want to look at how they're doing incentives as citizens. You want to pay attention to this. This is important. They're giving away tens of millions of dollars, if not billions sometimes. Nevada, $1 billion to Tesla. Tesla was going to move there anyway because they needed the lithium out of the Nevada desert. They're giveaways. So we give the incentive, and it's your money, and yet we're creating our own problems. They're self-inflicted wounds because now we've got to pay for all the growth on top of it all. So not every state may have the same cycle. These are the states I've seen, and there may be some differences. But the point is this. These are called systemic issues. And we talk about systems, but we've actually, and I'm blind, so take this seriously. You've actually got to see it. You've got to see how all these pieces work together and understand that in these systems, there's a leverage point, that A, B, C, D, E. I don't have to fix A and B and C and D. I need to find where C is. And this is a way we think about systems thinking in policy and in communities. So if you're in this space and you're thinking, where do I start? First of all, assess, do I have a community that's declining or do I have a community that's growing? And that's going to at least give you a sense of how to diagnose where to start. If you're in growth mode, all these things we heard today were so awesome. Affordable housing, homelessness, education. What happens to our education system and our homelessness and our housing when we are in a growth cycle? It becomes worse. We exacerbate it, right? Affordable housing becomes worse. At the same time, we're recruiting more businesses to our state. What are we doing? We're actually putting more pressure on the very thing we haven't even solved yet. And when we can think proactively, right? I say create your future, don't react to it, right? Our systems and government are all made up. They're just made up. If they're not working, unmake them. And if we're in these growth cycles, policymakers, then you should expect that they're thinking about all the repercussions of growth ahead of time. Because these are self-inflicted wounds on the most part of what we're seeing in these growth states. These are self-inflicted wounds. Now, you can't get perfect. You're always going to have some pressures. It's not going to be 100% perfect. But we can absolutely get better on these things and start thinking ahead. Now, zoning and all those issues are really key. But part of those are exacerbated because we keep putting pressure on these finite resources and not even paying the full cost. Now, what happens if you make folks pay the full cost? It sends price signals. And if you want to be in a free market, price signals matter because they'll tell you if you can afford the resource or not. And this can even help create what I call, a moderate growth. Growth that can pace with revenue because not everybody will move in. Price signals will send the cost to the developers and everyone else what the real cost of this is. And then, of course, in that space, you've got to make sure we're working with vulnerable populations, low-income folks. I've been there, done that, get it. And we can talk about safety net programs. That's for another discussion of how you make those things work. Most social service programs, by the way, are probably, at least in your states, 30 to 35% of the budgets. If you ask your policymakers, they'll have about zero visibility into what's actually going on in those systems. So, to sum up, is this my summary thing? Okay. You have the ability to make a huge impact in this world, but you can't do it on everything. So you have to, if there's anything you get out of today, is the idea of focus. Dosage, focus is how you get impact. And maybe you're in a community that's declining and you're not sure if you should focus on crime or economic development, and people spend 2 years analyzing and researching. You know what? They're all probably okay. Just start with one and be incredibly good with that. I'd rather have 60% of something versus 100% of nothing because I'm just analyzing it for 2 years. If it's in the top 3 and intuitively it makes sense for you to start there. And just get really, really good at that. Build a base, build your community, get more advocates, get petitioning, get a whole group to show up at the town hall meeting. Just keep pounding on one issue till you get traction. Look, in the governor's office, we would read the constituent letters every week. We tracked what constituents were saying, and I was shocked how few people actually called or wrote into the governor's office. I was shocked. These would be big issues, right? And we get 500 calls out of 3 million plus people, and then yet people complain all the time about government. I'm like, then show up. Then show up. Let me leave you with the final story so I can be on time. So this work of change can feel uncomfortable. And who here has ever felt insecure about doing this work? I have. I half the time don't know what I'm doing, okay? I got to just end with a story that has impacted me my whole life. I use it every day. So when I was going blind, I was in my 20s and I fell in a manhole one day. And I'm like, I got to figure out my life. This isn't working. I was really ashamed of using a cane. And there's just a lot of stuff I had to work through. So I went through a 5-month residential training program. I had my first son at the time. It was really tough to leave him for 5 months, but they would come visit on the weekends. And I would wear sleep shades all day, every day. And we would have to learn how to use power tools and barbecue and all this stuff to graduate. But the thing that scared me the most for graduating is that it was called our cane travel test. We call it orientation and mobility. And they would put us in a van, and they would drive us around Baltimore and drop us off at a undisclosed location. And we'd have to get back to the training center on our own, and we could ask one question along the way, just one, and we had a Braille compass, so that was it. The idea is they could parachute us into China and we could find our way home. I was just like, ooh, Baltimore, don't drop me off near the heroin district, because they have them there. So anyway, every day we would practice for this big event and spend a couple hours every day. And one day my teacher took me out to a park, and we were trying to navigate the park, and it felt like the Minneapolis airport to me. I don't understand that airport. I still hate that airport. And I would walk, and I would hit a bench. And then I'd step back, and I'd walk, and I'd hit dirt, and I'd step back. And then I'd walk some more steps, and then I'd hit bark. And I just got so frustrated that I just stopped walking. And I was like, this cannot be how this works. This is a nightmare. And I just stopped. And we sometimes, that was me physically stopping, but we often do that in our own lives. We get jaded, we get cynical, or we feel overwhelmed, or we feel insecure, or we're not sure what to do next. And we just kind of stop a little bit, right? We kind of give up. But my teacher came up behind me. He'd give me enough rope to hang myself, right? He was awesome. Finally, he's like, she's stubborn. She's not moving. So he came up to me, and he said, Kristen, you've got to learn to walk through your confusion. You've got to walk through your uncertainty. You've got to walk through your fear. So there's no new information by standing still. The new information comes when I have to walk into the unknown. And the unknown is scary. Like who of us really, you go to a town hall meeting for the first time, or you go to your school district, or you have an idea. How many of you have had an idea and you didn't share it because you weren't sure if people would accept it or not, right? So we stay quiet. And I really had to learn that idea, it made a difference for my whole life, which is there is uncertainty in this world. And we can either learn to be comfortable in our discomfort, Because the opportunity for impact is in what we don't know. It's often in taking on things we haven't done before, and it's uncomfortable. And when you learn to live in that space of being uncomfortable, like anything is possible, that's where you, here in this room collectively, is when you'll just step a little bit beyond what you know and say, I don't know how to do a whole system. I don't know how to take on a whole system. That's okay. Take on what you do know and be really good at that, and the next thing will come to you. But you're going to have to get a little uncomfortable, because doing more of what we already know just gives us more of what we already got. And we know in government, right? So that's it. Any questions? Yeah. Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm on time for your next amazing presenter. Okay, look at that. Bam. Bam. Thank you so much for joining. Sorry if we don't have time for questions, but we can ask them after. I'll just hang out until she goes up. I actually have to go teach. I forget that all the time. Christy's got to teach. I have a class I teach online at night. Thanks for having me. It's an honor. It's just such a great group of women.